History's bloodiest wars explained. Throughout human history, wars have reshaped borders, destroyed civilizations, and claimed millions of lives. While conflict has been a recurring feature of human society, some wars stand out for their unprecedented scale, brutality, and long-lasting consequences. These bloodiest wars were driven by power struggles, ideology, religion, colonial ambition, and nationalism, and their effects are still felt today. This article explores the deadliest wars in history, explaining their causes, scale, human cost, and historical significance. 1. World War II, 1939 to 1945. Estimated death toll, 70 to 85 million. World War II remains the deadliest conflict in human history, involving more than 30 countries across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. Causes: the harsh Treaty of Versailles after World War I, the rise of fascist regimes in Nazi Germany, Italy, and Imperial Japan, economic collapse during the Great Depression, expansionist ambitions of authoritarian leaders, why it was so deadly. Total war: entire economies and civilian populations were targeted, industrialized killing, including genocide, strategic bombing of cities, use of nuclear weapons, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, key atrocities, the Holocaust in which 6 million Jews were murdered, mass civilian deaths in cities like Dresden, Tokyo, and Stalingrad. Atomic bombings in Japan, impact World War II, reshaped global power, led to the creation of the United Nations, accelerated decolonization, and began the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. 2. The Mongol Conquests, 13th to 14th century. Estimated death toll, 30 to 40 million. Led by Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire in history. Causes: nomadic expansion, desire for tribute, resources, and control of trade routes, retaliation against hostile states. Why it was so deadly: systematic slaughter of resisting cities, psychological warfare to instill fear, destruction of agricultural systems leading to famine impact. While extremely violent, the Mongol Empire also promoted trade along the Silk Road and facilitated cultural exchange between East and West. 3. World War I, 1914 to 1918. Estimated death toll, 15 to 20 million. Often called the Great War, World War I introduced modern industrial warfare on a massive scale. Causes: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Escalating arms race among European powers. Why it was so deadly. Trench warfare led to prolonged stalemates. Introduction of machine guns, poison gas, and artillery. Poor medical care and mass conscription impact World War I. Collapsed empires. Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian. Redrew maps and created political instability that led directly to World War II. 4. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864. Estimated death toll, 20 to 30 million. One of the deadliest civil wars in history, the Taiping Rebellion took place in China during the Qing dynasty. Causes: economic hardship and famine. Religious fanaticism led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be the brother of Jesus Christ. Widespread resentment against the ruling dynasty. Why it was so deadly: large-scale civil warfare. Mass executions and famine, destruction of farmland and cities. Impact: the rebellion weakened imperial China and contributed to its eventual collapse in the early 20th century. 5. The An Lushan Rebellion, 755 to 763. Estimated death toll, 13 to 36 million. This rebellion against China's Tang dynasty caused one of the largest population declines in recorded history. Causes: corruption within the Tang government, power struggles between generals and the emperor, economic inequality. Why it was so deadly: prolonged warfare. Collapse of state authority, famine and mass displacement, impact. The Tang dynasty never fully recovered, marking the beginning of its decline. 6. The Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815. Estimated death toll, 3 to 6 million. A series of wars led by Napoleon Bonaparte These conflicts engulfed Europe and beyond. Causes: aftermath of the French Revolution, expansion of French influence, coalition resistance from European monarchies, why it was so deadly: massive conscription, large-scale battles across multiple continents, disease, especially typhus impact. The wars reshaped Europe, spread revolutionary ideals, and established Britain as a dominant global power. 7. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. Estimated death toll, 4 to 8 million. This war devastated Central Europe and is considered one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. Causes: religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants, political rivalry within the Holy Roman Empire, foreign intervention. Why it was so deadly: armies lived off the land, destroying villages, widespread famine and disease, civilian populations heavily targeted. Impact: the Peace of Westphalia reshaped European diplomacy and established the concept of national sovereignty. Why these wars were so bloody? Several recurring factors explain the extreme death tolls. Total war, involving civilians and economies. Technological advances in weaponry. Poor medical knowledge and disease. Ideological or religious extremism. Weak political institutions and internal collapse. Conclusion: history's bloodiest wars reveal the catastrophic consequences of unchecked ambition, hatred, and power struggles. While warfare has shaped nations and empires, its human cost is immeasurable. Understanding these conflicts is essential, not to glorify violence, but to learn from it and strive toward a future where such devastation is never repeated. While the most famous global conflicts often dominate historical discussion, many other wars, especially civil wars, colonial conflicts, and ideological struggles, were equally devastating in terms of human suffering. This section explores additional bloodiest wars and the broader patterns that made them so lethal. 8. The Chinese Civil War, 1927 to 1949. Estimated death toll, 8 to 12 million. The Chinese Civil War was fought between the nationalist government, Kuomintang, and the Communist Party of China, ultimately leading to the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Causes: political instability after the fall of the Qing dynasty, ideological conflict between communism and nationalism, Japanese invasion during World War II, which intensified chaos, why it was so deadly prolonged, guerrilla warfare, mass executions and reprisals, famine caused by disrupted agriculture. Impact: the war reshaped East Asia, led to the division between mainland China and Taiwan, and influenced global Cold War politics. 9. The Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1923. Estimated death toll, 7 to 12 million. Following the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia descended into civil war between the Red Army and the White Army, along with foreign intervention forces. Causes: collapse of the Russian monarchy, ideological struggle between communism and anti-Bolshevik forces, economic breakdown after World War I. Why it was so deadly: widespread famine, especially the Russian famine of 1921, political terror and mass executions, disease outbreaks including typhus. Impact: the war led to the creation of the Soviet Union and cemented authoritarian governance for decades. 10. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Estimated death toll, 2.5 to 5 million, mostly civilians. Often called the Forgotten War, the Korean War was one of the first major conflicts of the Cold War. Causes: division of Korea after World War II, ideological conflict between communism and capitalism, foreign intervention by the US, China, and the Soviet Union. Why it was so deadly: heavy bombing of civilian areas, rapid shifts in front lines, harsh winters, and limited medical infrastructure. Impact: the war ended in an armistice rather than a peace treaty, leaving the Korean peninsula divided to this day. 11. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. Estimated death toll, 3 to 4 million. The Vietnam War was a prolonged conflict between North Vietnam and its communist allies, and South Vietnam backed by the United States. Causes anti-colonial struggle against French rule. Cold War ideological rivalry, internal divisions within Vietnam, why it was so deadly, guerrilla warfare in dense terrain, widespread bombing campaigns, chemical warfare, Agent Orange, impact. The war deeply affected U.S. foreign policy, unified Vietnam under communist rule, and left lasting environmental and human damage. 12. The Congo Wars, 1996 to 2003. Estimated death toll, 5 to 6 million, sometimes referred to as Africa's World War. The Congo Wars involved multiple African nations and armed groups. Causes power vacuum after the Rwandan genocide. Ethnic tensions, competition over valuable natural resources. Why it was so deadly, mass displacement and starvation, disease and lack of medical care, targeting of civilians by militias, impact. The conflict destabilized Central Africa and remains one of the deadliest wars since World War II. 13. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Estimated death toll, approximately 620,000 to 750,000. The deadliest war in U.S. history, fought between the Union and the Confederacy. Causes slavery and states' rights, economic and political divisions, failure of compromise. Why it was so deadly. Introduction of modern weapons with outdated tactics. Poor sanitation and disease. Brutal prison camps. Impact. The war preserved the United States, abolished slavery, and transformed American society and governance. Common patterns in the bloodiest wars. Across continents and centuries, the deadliest wars share key characteristics. Civil wars are often deadlier than international wars. Civilians suffer the most, not soldiers. Famine and disease kill more than weapons. Ideological extremism prolongs conflict. Weak governments worsen humanitarian crises. The human cost beyond numbers, death tolls alone cannot capture the full devastation. Generations lost, cities erased, cultures destroyed, psychological trauma lasting decades. Many survivors lived with displacement, poverty, and unresolved political instability long after the fighting ended. Modern conflicts, genocide, and the changing face of war. As warfare entered the modern era, advances in technology, ideology, and global politics transformed how wars were fought and how devastating they became. While fewer wars are officially declared today, modern conflicts often blur the line between war, genocide, and terrorism, with civilians remaining the primary victims. 14. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. Estimated death toll, 500,000 to 1 million. This prolonged conflict between two regional powers became one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century. Causes border disputes, religious and ideological rivalry. Fear of revolutionary influence after Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution. Why it was so deadly. Trench warfare similar to World War I. Extensive use of chemical weapons. Human wave attacks and missile strikes on cities. Impact. The war ended in stalemate but devastated both economies and destabilized the Middle East for decades. 15. The Rwandan genocide, 1994. Estimated death toll, approximately 800,000 in 100 days. Though not a traditional war, the Rwandan genocide represents one of the fastest and most brutal mass killings in history. Causes colonial-era ethnic divisions, political extremism, state-sponsored propaganda. Why it was so deadly, systematic. Targeting of civilians, use of simple weapons on a massive scale. Failure of international intervention, impact. The genocide reshaped global discussions on humanitarian intervention and led to the establishment of new international justice mechanisms. 16. The Yugoslav Wars, 1991 to 2001. Estimated death toll, approximately 130,000 to 140,000. The breakup of Yugoslavia triggered a series of violent ethnic conflicts in the Balkans. Causes collapse of communist authority, ethnic nationalism, economic instability. Why it was so deadly. Ethnic cleansing campaigns, siege warfare, including Sarajevo mass displacement, impact. The wars led to the creation of several independent states and renewed NATO's role in Europe. 17. The war in Afghanistan, 1979 to 2021. Estimated death toll, 2 to 3 million, including indirect deaths. One of the longest wars in modern history, Afghanistan endured decades of continuous conflict. Causes: Soviet invasion in 1979, Cold War rivalries, rise of militant extremism. U.S.-led invasion after 9/11. Why it was so deadly. Guerrilla warfare, civilian casualties from airstrikes, chronic instability and poverty impact. The war reshaped global counterterrorism strategies and left Afghanistan politically fragile. 18. The Syrian Civil War, 2011 to present, estimated death toll, 500,000 plus. The Syrian conflict is among the deadliest wars of the 21st century. Causes: Arab Spring protests, authoritarian repression, foreign intervention. Why it was so deadly. Urban warfare, chemical weapons use siege tactics and mass displacement. Impact: millions became refugees, destabilizing neighboring regions in Europe. Genocide and war, a dangerous intersection. Some of history's deadliest events occurred where war enabled genocide, including the Armenian genocide. The Holocaust. Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge War creates chaos, dehumanization, and lack of accountability, conditions in which mass killings flourish. How warfare has changed. Old wars, large standing armies, clear battlefield, declared enemies. Modern wars, asymmetric warfare, non-state actors, cyber warfare and drones. Psychological and information warfare. Despite technological precision, civilian deaths remain alarmingly high. Are wars becoming less deadly? Statistically, large-scale wars between major powers have declined since World War II. However, civil wars have increased. Conflicts last longer. Indirect deaths, famine, disease, are often undercounted. Peace is fragile, not permanent. Final reflection: can history's bloodiest wars be prevented? History shows that war is not inevitable. It is the result of choices. Strong institutions, diplomacy, education, and respect for human rights remain the best defenses against mass violence. Remembering the bloodiest wars is not about numbers. It is about human lives and the responsibility to prevent future tragedy. Statistics, comparisons, and lessons for humanity. After examining individual conflicts, it is important to step back and compare them. Numbers alone cannot capture suffering, but they help us understand scale, intensity, and patterns in humanity's most violent episodes. Ranking the bloodiest wars by death toll. Rank war/conflict, estimated deaths. Time period: 1 World War II, 70 to 85 million, 1939 to 1945. 2 Mongol Conquests, 30 to 40 million, 1206 to 13, 68-3. Taiping Rebellion, 20 to 30 million, 1850 to 1864. 4 World War I, 15 to 20 million, 1914 to 1918-5. And Lucian Rebellion, 13 to 36 million, 755 to 763-6. Chinese Civil War, 8 to 12 million, 1927 to 1949-7. Russian Civil War, 7 to 12 million, 1917 to 1923-8. Congo Wars, 5 to 6 million, 1996 to 2003-9. Napoleonic Wars, 3 to 6 million, 1803 to 1815-10. Vietnam War, 3 to 4 million, 1955 to 1975. Note: many figures are estimates due to poor historical records, famine-related deaths, and political bias. Civilian versus military deaths. One of the most striking patterns is the increasing proportion of civilian casualties. Pre-20th century wars. Mostly soldiers. World War I, approximately 40% civilians. World War II, approximately 60 to 70% civilians. Modern conflicts, often 80 to 90% civilians. Why civilians suffer more today. Urban warfare. Aerial bombing, economic blockades, ethnic and religious targeting, collapse of healthcare and food systems, the role of famine and disease. In many bloodiest wars, Indirect deaths exceeded battlefield deaths. Examples: Russian Civil War famine, 1921, Taiping Rebellion, mass starvation, Congo Wars disease, outbreaks, war destroys, agriculture, trade routes, medical infrastructure. As a result, hunger and disease become silent weapons. Technology, multiplier of death. Early warfare, swords, spears, limited reach. Slower localized killing industrial and modern warfare. Machine guns, artillery, chemical weapons, nuclear bombs, drones, and cyber warfare. Technology allows fewer people to kill more efficiently, increasing the scale of destruction. Ideology and mass violence. The deadliest wars often involve absolute belief systems. Fascism, extreme nationalism, religious extremism, revolutionary ideology, when opponents are labeled as enemies of the people, infidels, subhuman. Mass killing becomes easier to justify. Why civil wars are especially deadly. Statistics show civil wars kill more people than wars between nations because no clear front lines. Neighbors fight neighbors. Revenge cycles escalate violence. Weak institutions fail to protect civilians. Examples: Taiping Rebellion, Chinese Civil War, Syrian Civil War Congo. Wars. Can we trust war? Death statistics? Accurate counting is extremely difficult due to destroyed records, political manipulation, displacement of populations, long-term deaths from trauma and poverty. Many wars are likely far deadlier than recorded. Lessons from history's bloodiest wars. Early intervention saves lives. Dehumanization leads to genocide. Unchecked power breeds mass violence. Peace treaties must be fair and inclusive. Remembering history reduces repetition. The moral responsibility of memory. Remembering these wars is not about glorifying violence. It is about honoring victims, learning from failure, strengthening global cooperation. Forgetting history does not bring peace. It invites repetition. Transition to the final part. The final section will explore whether humanity is becoming more peaceful, the future of warfare, how global institutions can prevent mass bloodshed, the future of war, and the hope for peace. After examining centuries of humanity's deadliest conflicts, a critical question remains. Are we destined to repeat history, or can we finally break the cycle of mass violence? This final part explores whether the world is becoming more peaceful, how warfare is evolving, and what lessons humanity must carry forward. Is the world becoming less violent? On a global scale, large wars between major powers have decreased since World War II. Direct conflict between superpowers has been avoided for decades. However, this does not mean the world is peaceful. What has improved? Fewer global wars, decline in interstate conflicts, growth of international diplomacy, stronger norms against genocide and conquest. What has worsened? Increase in civil wars, long-lasting regional conflicts, rise of terrorism and insurgencies, civilian populations as primary targets. Violence has not disappeared. It has changed form. The new face of warfare. Modern wars look very different from the battles of the past. 21st century warfare includes cyber attacks on infrastructure, drone strikes with remote operators, economic warfare, and sanctions. Information and propaganda wars, proxy wars fought through allies. These methods often avoid formal declarations of war, making conflicts harder to stop and easier to deny. The threat of future mass destruction, nuclear weapons. A single nuclear exchange could kill millions instantly and destabilize the planet. The existence of these weapons remains humanity's greatest existential threat: biological and chemical weapons. Though banned, these weapons still pose risks due to rogue states, terrorist groups, accidental release, artificial intelligence in warfare. AI-driven weapon systems raise ethical concerns about autonomous killing, reduced human accountability, faster escalation of conflicts. Why history still matters. Every bloodiest war in history began with political failure, dehumanization, unchecked ambition, silence from the international community. History does not repeat exactly, but its patterns echo. Ignoring these patterns risks repeating catastrophe. How future wars can be prevented. While war may never be fully eliminated, its scale and brutality can be reduced. Key preventive measures: early diplomatic intervention, strong international institutions, protection of human rights, education against hatred and extremism, accountability for war crimes. Peace is not passive, it requires constant effort.